Washington, the House voting now to pass a bill that will save the failing Highway Trust Fund, at least for the time being. Now, the fund is hemorrhaging cash and will completely run dry by August if Congress doesn't act. But our next guest says the fund is rife with abuse. Dan Mitchell, senior fellow at the Cato Institute, joins me now. And as we were saying, Dan, the House voting right now on this bill written by Dave Camp, who runs the House Ways and Means Committee. He's got a temporary fix to fund the fund by some $11 billion. Is this a good idea?
Well, it's a good idea if you think that Washington should continue to be the dominant player in state and local transportation decisions. I don't. I would much rather get rid of the federal gas tax, shut down the Department of Transportation, and shift these things back to the states and to local governments,
all right,
which is
Dan,
what our founding fathers intended.
Pardon me for interrupting you, but they just passed the bill. So breaking news right now, House just passing this bill, and it's an important business story. So we're breaking the news right here live on the network that House passing this bill 5021 by Dave Camp. This is a temporary fix, as we were just saying, for the Highway Trust Fund, funding it with some $11 billion. But, you know, Dan, you're making the point, who should be paying for this and how should it be paid for? What's the best way to do it? What about this concern, the way they want to do this in this bill? So there's some kind of tricky pension gimmick they want to use. Tell us about that.
They have a few gimmicks to finance the additional spending in the bill, which is probably a less worse option than increasing the gas tax like some senators want to do, or further increasing the tax burden on American companies, which is what the White House wants to do. But what's frustrating for a libertarian is, why are we doing this? Transportation spending on highways has doubled over the last several decades out of Washington, not to mention that 25% of gas tax monies are siphoned off into boondoggle mass transit projects. Sending the money to Washington in a leaky bucket is not a good idea.
Let's talk about the flowers and the bike paths and everything else that we're paying for with that. But here's the dollars and cents, and this is what I find so disturbing. We're essentially spending $50 billion a year, but we're only taking in $35 billion a year. When you look at the money in gas tax that's taken in to pay for bridge construction, to pay for highway construction, to make our roads better, we're simply overspending our budget. Something needs to be done to make these two numbers come into line. What should be done?
I think the answer is to get Washington out of the business. We've seen, whether it's transportation or whether it's the entire federal budget, they mismanage things in Washington. If we got these programs back to the state and local level, we'd have innovation, we'd have diversity, we'd have experimentation. We would learn what works better. In effect, copy what Bill Clinton did with welfare reform. Get better results by getting rid of a federal program, pushing it back to the states. I don't want politicians making decisions here in Washington on the basis of pork barrel considerations or who their campaign donors are.
That's exactly the way it works, though, Dan. That's exactly the way it works about 99.9% of the time. Look, we've even got the GOP on board, some members at least, the Chamber of Commerce, a strange and interesting group of people who want to raise the gas tax. What would be wrong with that? What's wrong with raising the gas tax to fix roads and bridges?
There might not be anything wrong with it if a state or local government wanted to make that decision. I mean, the fact that big business wants more infrastructure spending, that's not surprising. And frankly, we probably do need more infrastructure, but the question is whether we'll get the best bang for the buck by having Washington do it. Washington is where we get bridges to nowhere. Washington is where we get the corruption. I mean, not that state and local governments are immune from doing silly and corrupt things, but at least people are closer to the problems. They know what bridges and roads need work in their local communities, and you're less likely to get the kind of waste you get with Washington doing it.
There are other alternatives on the table. Tom Graves, James Lankford, both Republicans in Congress, saying they want to do different things, either end the fund altogether, have the states pay for it. Lots of different considerations out there. But look, I mean, this thing has just been put on pause, right? We're just kicking the can down the road right now until after the election to do something. Is this any way to run a country?
It's probably not a good way to run a country, but don't forget, they could always make things even worse. So sometimes just kicking the can down the road is better than the alternative. But you mentioned a couple of congressmen who want to change things. Senator Mike Lee also has a project on competitive federalism. The whole idea is get these things back to the state and local level where you're going to get better decisions, not this one-size-fits-all crony capitalism, pork barrel spending out of Washington.
Dan, thanks for coming on tonight.
Thank you.